What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Game on the Brain channel. My name is Kelvin, and I'm here to talk about the Nintendo Switch 2 game key cards. Now, if you're like me and you're a Nintendo fan and someone who's also a fan of game preservation, you might be upset at the idea of these cards that don't necessarily have the game data on the cartridge itself, but it's more so like a link to a download of the game data, which is very similar to a digital game if I'm being honest. But I'm here to tell you that these games are not targeted at you, and this is not something that we should really be worried about. And so to understand why you shouldn't be worried about, you have to kind of think about this as a console war, essentially, between the big three players, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo. Now, if you think back to Sony on the PlayStation 1 era, they used to make all kinds of games. They used to make like Spyro, Crash Bandicoot, a lot of stuff that would appeal to casual gamers. Then they would also have more mature games, more graphically intense games. And that was supposed to appeal to, I guess, the hardcore gamers, people who call themselves that, or people who care about like realistic and good looking graphics. Now, in this day and age, Sony has kind of moved away from those type of games, and they're more focused on like the God of Wars, the Uncharted's, Horizon Zero Dawn, The Last of Us, those type of games where the graphics are much more realistic and much more hardcore. If you think back to, I believe it was last year, sometime recently, they released a game called Astrobot. Now, this Astrobot game, not only did it receive a lot of like rave reviews for finally bringing Sony back to its original days back in the PlayStation 1 of having like a mascot character and all that stuff. The game also kind of went back and went through a lot of like Sony history and kind of showed what Sony was about. They went through all the different devices and all the different eras of PlayStation. Now, all that to say is that people were so happy for this game, a game that we normally would think, okay, this isn't necessarily typically Sony, like it's more of a casual game, it's not as hardcore as Sony's been recently. But the thing is, Sony kind of forgot what they used to be up until, Astrobot came out. And the reason I say that is the PlayStation 5 needs to have a broad appeal to as many gamers as possible. We need to get PlayStation 5s in everybody's hands. And if you're only making hardcore games for the hardcore gamers, people aren't going to want to buy the PlayStation 5 as much. Now, what I believe Nintendo's been doing for the last generation, Switch 1, is they've realized this. So Nintendo's more known for casual games, family-friendly games, but they've realized like, hey, you know what? We need the hardcore games too. And so last gen, a lot of games like, let's say, Resident Evil, Capcom released a lot of Resident Evil games that were cloud-based games. They weren't really like a download. They didn't actually play on the Switch. But guess what? Those games are not for someone like you and me. We would rather play a game directly from a cartridge, directly on the system. We don't want that kind of latency. But there's people that just want to play Resident Evil. And so the only way for them to buy a Switch is for them to have Resident Evil and games like that on the system. So essentially, if Nintendo didn't go through the effort of creating this cloud system, or Capcom or whoever it was, they didn't go through the effort of making this cloud system or like different ways to kind of try to play more graphically intense games on the Switch, they probably wouldn't have sold as many Switches. Now, granted, the Switch is popular enough that it sold a lot of units on its own, which is good. It's very healthy for the Switch or Nintendo to have a system that sort of appeals to a broad market. So that's kind of the thing that Sony, it was revealed by Sony when they released Astrobot Rescue Mission. Now, if you think about it, Microsoft is not doing so well. Microsoft is basically ducking out of the console race. And the thing is, like, they don't have any like casual games that appeal to like a mass market, like casual gamers. So if you follow this logic, it's starting to make sense. Like Nintendo, even though they did pretty much raise the bar with the Switch 2, they've made it so that it's actually pretty graphically intense. It's not quite the level of PlayStation 5, but let's say it's between PS4, PS4 Pro. But even at that level, just having like PS4 did not have like a fast SSD, but the Switch 2 does. So not only do they have a fast SSD and the new micro SD EX cards, this is a way so that they're not necessarily super powered in terms of CPU and GPU, but in terms of read and write speeds, they are super powered. So it's gonna give the Switch 2 a chance to be like a little bit stronger in terms of like comparing it to a PS4 or PS4 Pro. And so I believe Nintendo's sort of just been thinking about these things all together. And essentially that's the reason for the game key cards is not only are they providing a system that's much more powerful than like the Switch 2 or what people expect from Nintendo, but they're also giving you sort of like another way to access a Switch game by allowing these game key cards. Part of the reason that these companies wouldn't want to, like this happened on the Switch 1 where companies didn't really want to put the full game on the cartridge was because it would cost more to license the bigger capacity cartridges. So they opted not to do that and decided to just do a digital version. So now I believe the cartridges are 64 gigs and some games don't fit on the 64 gigs. So they have the option to do the game key cards so that it becomes a download instead of being forced to have it on the cartridge. Now, if you think about it, Nintendo probably will not be making any game key cards because they're just gonna make the cartridge whatever size they need because they're the ones that own the license to the cartridges. They don't have to pay anyone license fees, whereas the third parties have to pay Nintendo the licensing fees. So the bigger the cartridge, not only are they paying for the storage itself, but they're also paying a licensing fee. So the key cards are just an option for them to cheaply get their game on the console. And like I was saying before, Nintendo has, because of that, Nintendo's making it easier for these third parties. And that's giving Nintendo essentially an option to appeal to these more hardcore gamers that expect more of a graphical, those type of games that are available on the other systems. If Nintendo could prove that the Switch can handle all types of games that people want to play, people might make it their option to buy the Switch 2, in addition to a PlayStation, in addition to an Xbox, or instead of a PlayStation or an Xbox, or even a PC, right? So essentially, the game key cards are a way to sort of just broaden the market. Sort of think about it this way, like we're getting like these more hardcore gamers onto our team. They're supporting the Switch, and thereby because they're supporting the Switch, we get more games, we get more Nintendo games, we get more of the games that we want to play. Essentially, Nintendo's always been there trying to create new experiences. They did an amazing job of having a varied game experience in last gen, and they're doing another pretty good job of appealing to indie developers. And now this gen, I think their focus is to get the third party, like AAA developers, like let's say Grand Theft Auto 6, Street Fighter 6, like all these type of games that people want to play. And maybe they feel like the Switch will be the inferior version. Nintendo's doing what they can to try to make the Switch an equivalent version as the PS5 version, as the Xbox version. So in my opinion, I believe that that's what they're doing. And they're not necessarily trying to rob us of having like a physical game on the cartridge. They're basically just trying to give more players a way to play the games that they want to play that might not necessarily be available on Switch at launch. So I'm kind of thinking that as the Switch 2's lifespan goes on, we're probably going to see higher capacity cartridges, maybe at cheaper prices for licensing, who knows. But this is also a way for the third-party developers to keep their prices as low as possible so that it's more appealing for them to get it on the Switch. One more thing to think about too is, aside from just making games available digitally, you have to think about shelf space. Now, as consumers, shelf space isn't something we really think about at GameStop, at Target, things like that. But these third-party developers want to be able to put their games on the shelf so that The casual gamer who's just walking through the store can see like, oh, they have this game for Switch, let me get this. Whereas the rest of us kind of know what's on Switch. They're kind of depending on more sales from people just being in the store on the shelves and people seeing their games. So that's another thing to think about, just like shelf space. And yeah, that's another way that the third-party companies can benefit from this key card situation. All right, hopefully that makes sense. And I'm gonna end it there because I see the video's at 10 minutes. Let me know what you guys think. If you agree, disagree, just let me know in the comments. This is not a discussion where I determine like factually what the answer is. This is a discussion that needs to be had between all gamers. And that's what I'm seeing as my opinion. So let me know if you guys think I'm wrong. Let me know if I missed something. I just want to know what you guys think. All right, guys, I'll catch you in the next video. Peace out.